Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 301 through 304, which will be covering manga chapters 419 through 421. And yeah, there's an extra episode in there because there is a filler holiday special yet again, so I'll cover that at the end. But yeah, Robin's time is just about out in the main episodes, and with no one around, it'll be up to an unlikely hero to save her while Luffy kicks it up another notch against Lucci. So, synopsis. Spandam has now got Robin to the end of the Bridge of Hesitation, and pretty much all hope is just about lost, but the hero we need comes to the rescue while the others race to reach Robin. While Luffy continues to duel Lucci, but Gear Second has proved to be very taxing on him, so he ups the ante by finally revealing Gear Third to us all and Lucci. Okay, so differences. There are actually quite a few differences. As you've noticed, maybe that this set of episodes only covers 3 chapters, so it's basically a chapter per episode almost. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of padding in these episodes with a lot of flashbacks from previous episodes inserted into moments just to kind of remind the viewer, I guess, but also to pad out time. But first, to start off, when Lucci first experiences Gear Second, Lucci kind of internally talks to himself about how careless about Luffy he's been. In the manga, though, to me, it looks like he's actually talking out loud to himself, but the anime makes a distinction of making it sort of an internal monologue that he does in his head, which is kind of a difference. Then we also get repeat flashbacks of the Ohara incident when Spandam reveals that he knows everything all about the Ohara incident, even though that was supposed to be kept a secret, which he found out from his father. And then we also get, similarly, flashbacks of Saul's death during Usopp's rescue of Robin, when she finally sees that there are people that are willing to risk their lives to save her. Another interesting change that they make in the anime is when Usopp hears something right after he saves Robin and he notices some unknown sound. The explosion happens, but at the end of episode 301, in the anime, this is a lot more elaborate with sort of like water and bubbles streaming and sort of like this like squealing sound that Usopp hears. While in the manga, it just sort of, you see a little thought bubble with exclamation marks, and Usopp mentions that he hears something, but you don't really get a sense of what he's hearing. So in the manga, it actually seems like he's reacting to the first explosion from the Buster call, but in reality, in the anime, it actually makes it seem like a very distinct thing that Usopp is hearing, different from the blast. And so I don't quite like this change because clearly Oda meant this as a misdirection. Like, you're not supposed to know that it was something else that Usopp heard. It's only until a few, episodes later or a few chapters later where Usopp starts talking about that weird sound and you realize maybe that wasn't the explosion that he was reacting to. But the anime makes a very clear distinction between the two. And then we get an extended sequence of Robin and Frankie fighting back once she's freed as they take out some Marine soldiers and decide to capture the ship for their escape. Now, this is implied to have happened, but it actually doesn't take place in the manga. We don't really see it happening, but it's pretty safe to say that this is something that happened because you do see Robin and Frankie having taken out some of the Marine soldiers later on. There's also an added scene of Kokoro, Chimney, and Gombe running through the tunnels as Kokoro has a kind of a sweet scene where she's enjoying herself for the first time since Tom was alive. As she's really getting into all this excitement and kind of this hope that they can kind of get back at the world government. And then we see Nami catch up to them. That part is canon. However, in the manga, the panel that you see, she's already caught up to them and is in the process of running to them. So we don't actually get to see her catching up to them. So this scene is half canon, half filler. And then the next set of encounters with Luffy and Lucci, obviously there are far more extended scenes with their fighting, and it's drawn out just a bit before Lucci kind of goes into his sort of reasoning of what Gear Second really is. In the manga, there's only like a page and a half worth of action, but there's clearly far more that's inserted into the anime to kind of pad out the time. And then lastly, where the difference is, almost the entire first half of episode 3 or 4 is like filler, except for very small moments that are interspersed between them. Like, for example, Spandam boasting that he's untouchable by the Buster Call because of his sort of prestige that he has. And then the shots of the defeated CP9 are also part of the manga as well as Robin kind of uncontrollably shivering at the thought of the Buster Call. The extended sequence of the Buster Call attacking is all added for the anime, as this moment only really takes up a single page and you don't really see much of it in the manga. So all those shots of the galleon ship firing upon Enies Lobby are basically added to, again, fill time. But yeah, that kind of concludes it for the differences, so let's move into the episodes themselves. So we begin with the Gates of Justice, completely open, as it gets ready for the fleet of ships for the Buster Call to enter through. Thankfully, we get to see the Frankie family and the Galila guys, as well as the Giants, all racing to get the hell out of there and escaping to safety. With Frankie now through, and on his way to Robin, Luffy can fully concentrate on taking down Lucci. And it's interesting to see Lucci a little concerned about Luffy's Gear 2nd power-up, as he mentions that he was shocked at his sudden power. And not only that, he says how careless he's been basically playing with his quote-unquote food instead of finishing off sooner. I think this is the first time we ever see Lucci not as confident in himself and actually see kind of the cracks in his armor. And I always love these moments when the villain finally realizes just how much trouble they're in when facing Luffy. Robin is now just mere feet away from the ship that is set to take her away, but she is determined to do anything she can to not cross that gate. Spandam reveals that he's well aware of everything that happened at Ohara because he was told the stories from his father, Spandine. This, for some reason, is treated like a big reveal, but it seems pretty obvious that was the case, at least to me. It was, but I suppose it is a shock to Robin, who was just a child at the time. And I do like that this further serves as motivation for Robin to defeat Spandam, though, as she didn't already have enough already. I mean, I think everything he's done up till now deserves retaliation, but this just adds even more weight to that. As Spandam taunts Robin about all the horrible trauma she's endured over the last 20 years of her life, and powerless to do anything about it, she's brought to tears, yet she still has the strength and will to declare that she's still alive, and because of that, Ohara and their sacrifices will not be in vain, nor will their will ever die. And unlike the other Straw Hats who only got the inherited will of maybe one person, Robin has carried the weight of not only the inherited will of the scholars, but of Ohara, the entire country, but literally the history of the world. I mean, that is a tremendous burden to carry, especially for a little girl. And she's carried that for 20 years while also being basically persecuted and called a criminal her entire life for that very purpose. I mean, it really just shows you just how strong Robin really is and how much she's endured and sacrificed for basically for history, not just for herself, but also for humankind as well. Robin, still believing that her nakama will come to rescue her, still tries to stay strong, but then Frankie gets caught on the landmine that Spandam set and gets flung off the bridge. The last ray of hope was just wiped away, and this moment was so tense. As Robin is being dragged away, she's just completely distraught and at a loss of words at how vexing this all is, and her tears just won't stop. And yeah, it's really hard to watch. And when you stop to think about this moment, from Robin's perspective, it must be so frustrating and desperate, as she doesn't want to die, but also all the hopes that Saul, Clover, Olvia, and all the other researchers gave their lives to give Robin a second chance, not to mention the sacrifices the Straw Hats have made thus far to save her, might all be in vain if she gets taken away. And despite all the power Robin possesses herself, she's powerless to do anything at this moment. And on top of the fact that the last ray of hope just got blown away, and I can't imagine this kind of frustration on Robin's part. And it really comes across as you, the viewer/reader, desperately want something to intervene and save her. I remember reading this and thinking, something has to save her. and you're just on the edge of your seat waiting for something to happen, whether it be whatever. And I mean, it is a shonen anime. We all know something will save Robin, but what? You start thinking of scenarios in your head. Is Frankie gonna show up again somehow, recovering from that blast? Are Zoro and Sanji gonna make it there in time? Which is not likely, since they would have had to pass Luffy and Lucci. Or maybe Spandam's incompetence will somehow delay the inevitable. But as each second passes by, as we get closer to crossing that threshold in the gate, it gets more and more desperate. And then something so unexpected and so amazing happens. And I remember I leapt out of my chair and just shouted, "Oh my God!" as Spandam somehow gets blown away from the back. At first, you're obviously thinking it's Frankie and his like weapons left shot or something. But then you realize he's nowhere to be found, and the Marine soldiers are getting sniped one by one until in your mind it dawns on you who it is before it's even revealed. And it's freaking Sogeking, aka Usopp, standing triumphantly all the way from the Tower of Law. And I seriously can't tell you how freaking amazing this moment was as an Usopp fan, but just as a reader / watcher of One Piece. This has got to be one of the most cathartically satisfying moments in the entire series thus far for so many reasons. So let's break it down. For Robin, her nakama has come through for her. Her faith was rewarded and is reminded of those fateful words that Saul imparted to her before he died, that she would one day encounter nakama who will protect her. And when it seemed like all hope is lost, they came through once again. But the significance of that is that it's not one of the heavy hitters, but it's poetically Usopp of all people, the man that has always been considered the weakest and seemingly useless member of the Strong Hats, even from the fans' perspective up until now. I feel like I remember, obviously we've talked about this a lot, but yeah, Usopp's always been kind of on the lowest rung for fans of the series. And those same reasons were why Usopp left the crew in that sort of ugly fashion. But here, when they needed it most, Usopp is their only hope, and he comes through in the biggest way possible, saving the life of one of their own. And Oda is just incredible the way this was all set up, and juggling both Robin's story arc with Usopp's story arc this entire time, and crossing together at the perfect moment in the perfect way. And on top of that fact, that just a few episodes ago, we had Sanji plan and predict all of this. This is what Sanji was talking about. How as long as they had Usopp, that Robin was going to be saved. Not only was Sanji the only person strategic enough to realize this, but to be the one to believe and trust in Usopp was so heartwarming to see. I also love that we get to see Sanji proudly boasting about their amazing sniper. The entire sequence hasn't even finished yet, as when we finally do get to see Usopp, he's triumphantly posing like a superhero that he is, while hilariously singing his own theme song in the background, while Spandam and the Marines are in absolute shock and awe in Usopp's marksmanship. I also love how Zoro is like, "Is the singing necessary?" as Usopp goes into this incredibly high falsetto, "Lock on!" Like you can hear that in the background. It's interesting too, as we've seen glimpses of Usopp's sniper skill, but this is the first time I feel like we get a full grasp of just how amazing or godly, you might say, his shooting skills are in context, as we hear from the Marine soldiers just how much of an impossible shot Usopp is making because of the insane distance, the strong winds, the small targets. It's not just one shot too. He's hitting multiple shots in rapid succession. And for me, at least this is the first time I realized that Usopp does have a superhuman skill. Because to me, he went from someone who's good at sniping to, oh my god, Usopp is something insane with superhuman abilities, even in the world of One Piece. Like his shot and marksmanship is crazy, kind of like Hawkeye in the Avengers. But yeah, with this opening, Robin makes a break for it, but there are still too many soldiers, and it's too many for even Usopp to take down all of them from range. And as they open fire, Robin is once again in danger, but who else would show up to save her? This time, it's Frankie, back and blocking all the bullets with his cyborg body. And it's at this point things are finally starting to turn around, and you start to really get those goosebumps as Usopp has delivered the remaining 2 keys to complete the set and release Robin. And I love that Usopp's message to Robin is that she is a Straw Hat Nakama and is now free to do as she wants. And the first thing she does is slap the ever living crap out of Spandam, who deserves way worse, but this is a good start. And I love how this is basically a come full circle moment when Usopp was on the train telling her to believe in Luffy, and she's finally been rewarded now that she has started to believe in Luffy, but not only just Luffy, but the entire crew. And it's such an amazing moment and just so cathartic. I absolutely love this moment. It's one of my favorite moments in the entire series, and it just lives in my head forever. Just before the episode ends, though, something odd happens as Usopp hears something, and then an explosion happens. And it turns out it was the Buster Call commencing. However, there was something strange about what Usopp heard and the cannonball at this point, but that will be a mystery for some another time. But yeah, there's something strange about what Usopp heard, which is different from the cannonball that I talked about in the differences section. With the Buster Call in full swing, they don't have time to figure out what that was, as the Tower of Law is shot and blown away in the next shot, as they're ordered to indiscriminately fire upon everything in Eniasabi, with Usopp still on top of the tower. But after a dramatic moment, it's revealed that Usopp obviously made it off the tower, but I love that neither Zoro or Sanji make any attempt to catch him, as he must have fallen like 200 feet into the ground. And he's like comically hurt, which we'll see later on. But with Robin free, their next goal is escape. Robin and Frankie then turn their sights to the ship that Spandam was supposed to leave on, and it's a bit of poetic irony that the ship that represented death and doom for Robin and the Straw Hats now represent life and hope, as that's their only way of escaping. We get an extended sequence, like I mentioned in the differences section, of Robin and Frankie taking out a bunch of Marines to capture the escape ship. However, in the manga, this doesn't happen. And I don't really mind this kind of addition because it essentially slightly adds a bit to what we already know is actually happening. Like, it's kind of assumed. So I like that we get to see some of this, and we get to see Frankie and Robin kind of fight together and flex their muscles a bit. With Robin saved, once we get back to Luffy, he's still managing to go toe-to-toe with Lucci. However, the Gear Second is starting to take a larger toll on him, and Lucci sees this and manages to figure it out what Gear Second is. And this is the first time we actually get a proper explanation as to what's actually happening. And surprisingly, it makes a lot of sense about, as much sense as you can possibly make it when you're concerning a rubber man and his superhuman powers. But it's explained that he's essentially doping, and he's increasing his blood flow to grant him this speed and strength boost. And the reason Luffy can do this is because his rubber blood vessels and heart can stand the strain of the immense increase in blood pressure and blood flow. However, as we've surmised, that because Luffy's actual physical body hasn't been trained to withstand that kind of strength increase and burden, it's hurting himself to the point where Lucci points out that it's actually eating into his life expectancy. So basically, this is the One Piece version of Kaioken from Dragon Ball Z, if you know what that is. Now, this is an interesting concept that Luffy is willing to chew through some of his own life force to protect his friends, which can lead to some interesting dilemmas later on in the series, I feel like. Unlike, will Luffy ever need to choose to sacrifice more of his life expectancy for his nakama? As well as, on the other hand, this also sounds like something that Luffy can actually train up his physical body to be able to withstand Gear Second better. Kind of like how Goku trained his body to be able to use Kaioken more easily, although he kept making it harder on himself by multiplying it each time to the point where it got to like times 20 and beyond. And even in the super, but that's something else altogether. But yeah, Lucci, kind of being the sadistic bastard he is, decides to make things harder by cutting through the wall and letting in all the water from the outside flood the underwater tunnels, which seems like an odd choice even for him, as he himself is susceptible to the effects of seawater. But I guess he's confident he can beat Luffy before that becomes an issue. Although, to be fair, we do get to see how he actually resolves this in just a little bit, as he escapes to the upper levels above sea level. But the people who are in the most immediate danger that Luffy realizes are the people coming up the tunnel, namely Nami and company. And if that isn't enough, we go from one crisis to the next as the Buster Call has commenced in full force and has begun their bombardment. As we get to see the faces of the 5 admirals, they aren't named here, but they do get named later on, so I'm just going to tell you their names. But in order of their appearance from right to left are Momonga, Onigumo, Doberman, Kamakachi, and Strawberry. They're all pretty cool in their own right. I mean, obviously that's kind of a spoiler. We do get to see more of them later on. But I think my favorite of the 5, of at least through their appearances throughout the series, is Momonga, the first one we see. I won't really get into it at why I like him the most, as that's basically big spoilers more than anything, so I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, these guys are cool. For episode 303, though, we get another feudal holiday special, but we're going to skip that for now, as I will give my brief thoughts at the end of the episode. So for now, we're going to push ahead to episode 304, where we see the Buster Call again, just completely obliterating in the NES lobby. And seeing this is affecting Robin's PTSD from the Ohara incident, as she's brought to her knees and unable to stop shivering. And it's really hard to see someone who's been so strong emotionally to the point where, you know, we've never really seen her anything rattling her to be this affected. Meanwhile, we see Zoro and Sanji now running down the same underground tunnel, chasing after Nami, carrying Usopp together, as Usopp has sustained some basically cartoon injuries from this massive fall, saying that he's broken like 2, 3, 10, 20, 100 ribs. And I say cartoon injuries because we all know he's going to be fine. And even here, he seems to be fine because he just gets back up and starts running after Sanji and Zoro after he's dropped. But this does pose another issue, as now the rest of the Straw Hats are all in danger of being drowned by the flooding waters caused by Lucci earlier, which makes you wonder how they're all going to get out of that one, because basically the remaining Straw Hats are all down there. I originally thought, since they only have one Devil Fruit user among them, which is Chopper, who's already unconscious and attached to Kokoro's head, I always thought that like Zoro was going to like cut through the tunnel and they would just basically try and swim up, since the water's now calm because of the Gates of Justice opening. So I could see them swimming up, but that's a long swim though. But yeah, that was what was going through my head at the time when I first read this moment. Anyways, the fight between Lucci and Luffy intensifies, and I really have to say, I really like the animation here between these scenes, as they do kind of sacrifice a bit of detail and depth in the animation and drawings. In exchange, they create this sort of more fluid and dynamic look, kind of similar to how movie 6 looked. And yeah, if you've seen the 6th movie, I feel like the same director, or at least the same animators, worked on this portion of the fight, because the way it's sort of, they use these like thin lines with very like streaks, like the smearing effect. It makes it look really fluid. And I apologize, I didn't really look this up, but I feel like they're the same animators, or at least the same director. But yeah, it creates this really more fluid and dynamic look and movements, which really gives the fight this like fast-paced and kinetic look, which is, I feel like, a good decision, because it does look really awesome to see how fast, you know, especially Leopard Lucci and Gear Second Luffy moving. And Lucci ultimately starts getting the upper hand again, as Luffy has to stop using Gear Second to save some stamina. But Luffy decides to use some wordplay with Backbone, as he figures now is a good time to use Gear Third on Lucci, and this will be our first time we actually get to see Gear Third fully. Just like the previous 2 times it was teased, we see him bite down on his thumb, and we now get to see why. And I'll be honest, I was not expecting this at all after seeing what Gear Second was, and believe me, I was pretty shocked. Basically, Luffy blows into his thumb and inflates his fist and arm, yelling out "Bone Balloon" or "Honefusen," which is crazy when you think about it. That means he's biting down hard enough to pierce his own skin and bone, enough to inflate the bones themselves. And with the fist the size of a giant, as Luffy exclaims, he uses this to unleash the Gomu Gomu no giant pistol, which Lucci thinks is just a bluff, but then takes a face load of a massive fist to his entire body, and blasting him clear out of the tower, where we see just the scale of Luffy's fist and the power it has as it pierces through the top half of the entire tower, with the fist being like 4 times the size of Lucci's already massive leopard body form. And this is definitely a game changer. And it's a nice symmetry with the Gear Second, which is all about speed to increase power, whereas Gear Third is all about brawn and sort of the increase in size to his power. One thing that crosses your mind when Luffy goes into Gear Third is how this is different from something like Gomu Gomu no Balloon. And he explains it that instead of just inflating himself, he actually inflates his bones, which is already harder than his skins and muscles, which is why Gomu Gomu no Balloon just kind of like bounces things off because he's just inflating his like soft skin and muscles. Whereas Gear Third, he's expanding and blowing into his bones, which are hard. And it also kind of makes sense why he shrinks down after using this move, as stretching his body that much must have some kind of backlash action, like when you really stretch something rubber and it snaps back and compresses, and it really starts getting your mind racing about what the other moves will look like when he does Gear Third with them, especially something like Gomu Gomu no Gatling. And I also remember thinking at the time, can he do Gear Second and Third at the same time to get like the speed and brute strength at the same time eventually? I'm sure at this point, doing both at the same time would be way too much for his body, but he could someday train up his physical body to handle that kind of strain, maybe? At least that's what was running through my head at the time when I was reading this. One other thing of note is that in Japanese, Luffy calls Gomu Gomu no giant pistol Gomu Gomu no Gigant pistol, which after that, I looked it up. Gigant is just another word for giant, used in many other languages, and is derived from the Greek word gigantes, I think is how you pronounce it. But yeah, just kind of an interesting fact there. Some word etymology for you there. Now, in my opinion, on Gear Third, the Gear Third has always been a pretty lukewarm reception from me compared to how much I love Gear Second. Like I mentioned a while back, I absolutely freaking love Gear Second. It's so cool. But Gear Third is kind of boring and awkward looking to me. Not that I hate it or anything. I still think it's really fun. It's just not nearly as cool as Gear Second. And it's literally just hit bigger and harder, which is just not as interesting to me. But Gear Third is just as much a part of Luffy's identity as anything else going forward. So, it's not something that I hate, like I said, but yeah, it's just something I was just expecting something different from Gear Third. What that something was, I don't have any clue, but yeah, here we are. But that brings this set of episodes to a close, and all the canon material at least for this podcast. But like I mentioned, there was another holiday special that was kind of sandwiched in between this in episode 303. So we get a random filler episode, again set in the fictional feudal Japan style reality called Grand Jipangu, which is the same one from earlier with the two holiday specials from episodes 291 and 292. And I'm not 100% sure, but given its timing and the premise of the episode, I assume this episode was to celebrate the Sakura Blossom Festival, so the Cherry Blossom Festival in Japan, which happens usually in late March to early April. And this episode aired directly in the center of that on April 1st, which also happens to be Usopp's birthday. That has nothing to do with anything, but it's just a cool coincidence. The episode sees Ninjin or Carrot get sick with the flu and can't go see the Great Millennium Sakura Tree for the festival. And everyone is bummed out about it, with Luffy and Chopper wanting to figure out somehow a way to either heal him so he can go see it or to get him there and be able to see it. However, the Great Sakura Tree is found to be stolen, and for some reason Luffy is suspected because of his desire to somehow let Ninjin see the Sakura Tree. Of course, it turns out that it wasn't him, and it was actually Buggy and Foxy. And even though it's a non-canon, it's kind of crazy to see how far Robin can sprout her body parts. There's this one scene with her Hana Hana fruit that she sprouts her eye all the way across like this bay to another island where Buggy and Foxy are keeping the tree, and it makes you wonder what the actual range is on her powers. I've always just imagined it was something like 100 yards or something like that or so. Like a decent distance, but not like a super far reach. But this starts to make me wonder, like, what are the limits to this thing? Does she just need line of sight? But even that we know isn't true, because she was able to sprout her eye on Luffy's hand as it was in the sky cloud sea. And so she couldn't see Luffy's hand past the water line or the cloud water line. So does line of sight not matter? Anyways, it's an interesting thought exercise. But yeah, overall, this filler episode, for the most part, it's a lot less interesting than the other two, as it really does seem like a Saturday morning cartoon style episode. But I did enjoy that Zoro was a part of the story a little bit more, and I even loved how he was integrated into the story as he fell asleep in the tree waiting for the festival and woke up after it was stolen and didn't even like react to the immense amount of rustling that must have been caused by moving the tree that size. And I also like that Chopper sees that what ends up making Ninjin feel better is the sight of a sakura tree blossom, just as Hiruluk showed in the main story. On the whole, though, this filler is far more boring and forgettable. But some other things of note. The I did really like that gag of the day-night flipping at the beginning, where it's literally on like a spinning dial and just flips. I did find that gag really funny. I laughed out loud watching that. Also, at the 4-minute 34-second mark on the Crunchyroll stream, we see Totsan, aka Panda Man, sitting at the Pinwheel restaurant. So that was a nice continuity there. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to really say on this filler. But now that we're essentially going into the final act of the NES lobby conflict, things are starting to get very chaotic with the Buster Call in full force, the Straw Hats in danger of drowning, and Luffy pulling out his literal big guns to try and take out Lucci once and for all. But we will have to see on the next podcast for the conclusions. I guess not necessarily conclusion. There's probably a few more episodes. But yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast for updates of when I post new episodes and to see some pictures of my manga collection. As always, I want to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Just a brief spoiler section, so if you want to stay for that, feel free to do so. If not, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye! Alrighty, so spoiler section. Again, mostly just off the cuff, non scripted stuff. But I think the first thing I wanted to talk about was the idea of Luffy kind of eating into his life expectancy. And this is sort of the first time we do see the instance of that with Gear Second kind of being a burden on his body. And yeah, this is a concept that comes up repeatedly throughout the series, especially during the Impel Downs when Luffy has to go through the hormone treatment from Ivankov after he's poisoned by Magellan, and he eats through his expectancy even more. Now, I feel like this plot thread is kind of dropped for the most part after that, because after that happens, we have the time skip, and he learns how to use Gear Second and Gear Third far more efficiently, to the point where I feel like that's not even an issue anymore. He can just use Gear Second, and he actually just uses it in certain body parts, almost like he, after he comes back from the time skip, he's able to use Gear Second with his arms rather than using his entire body and his legs to pump through his. And so I feel like it's not a non-issue anymore. But I do think Oda is setting up for something, and I think you can kind of foreshadow it based on what happened to Roger. And what we see with Roger in Wano with the flashback with Oden and everything, he was obviously dying because of a medical reason, some sort of a disease. And I think Luffy is kind of on the same path. Like, all this sort of damage he's doing to his body for the sake of beating these opponents and defying the odds will eventually catch up to him. And I think, and I want to be wrong about this, but I do think this is kind of setting up the fact that, yeah, Luffy will eventually die towards the end of the series, or the end of the series will be Luffy's death. And yeah, I hope I'm wrong about this, but there's definitely a lot of foreshadowing about the fact that Luffy is doing a lot to his body and sort of eating away at his own life expectancy. Anyways, yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in the spoiler section. Nothing too big, just my quick thoughts on that whole thing. But we'll get more into that as we get to the Impel Downs and the post time skip era. But thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next episode. See ya.